I can tell there's something going on with you. Something troubling you. Maybe it's time you open up.
You know what type of stories I enjoy? Grand emotional journeys whereupon a character in the audience gets to witness the many facets of themselves, one where the hero or protagonist is equally surprised at their result as the audience is. Or more simply, I like feelings. And you know what else I enjoy? Colors. I really like the usage of color and all the splendid spectacle that comes with it. I enjoy it when a wide palette is used, and I like it when a single color is chosen and we get to see it repurposed or seen in several shades and hues. And it seems to me that many people enjoy these two concepts together and really try to get them to work. Quite often, honestly, we find ourselves equating something as ethereal as emotion into tangible material ideas like colors or sounds or anything of the sort. I see this pattern a lot in the media I watch because the stories and narratives I'm drawn to need several ways to communicate these complicated feelings into something a little more understandable. And while colors and feelings can both coexist with each other sometimes in ways that I really enjoy, I've noticed a failing trend when these two things leave the world of subtlety or base sensation and become the textual experience of the story itself. Namely, Inside Out by Pixar and Life is Strange True Colors by Deck 9. Both are stories about emotions, emotional journeys from the protagonist, where the plot is somewhat less important than the emotional journey that the characters embark under. And I won't lie and say I wasn't drawn to both of these stories because of their emotional premise, and the very idea I was just talking about. However, when I finish these stories, which, aren't super original in concept, I find myself dissatisfied. Dissatisfied because I feel like I didn't get a nuanced depiction of the vast palette of colors and I didn't fall into the deep void of emotional complexity. Instead, the concept felt like it limited Inside Out's Riley and Life is Strange's Alex's story and their respective supporting cast, limited them to a small plate of acceptable and categorical emotions that at times are illuminating but fail to be anything deeper. Both have limited choices of colors from the same yellow, red, blue, purple, and equally categorizing emotions that fall into them: happy, mad, sad, and afraid. I know Inside Out has disgust, and I appreciate the inclusion of my favorite color and a new emotion, but disgust is also the emotion who probably gets the least amount to do in that story. Either way, both these stories chose basically the same feelings and chose to personify them in similar ways through those exact colors. And I assume, dear viewer, if you were asked to give color to joy or sadness, I'm sure you would choose the exact same. I know I would. But I think of a quote from Dr. Brené Brown's Atlas of the Heart, a book about the language and feelings where she conducted surveys on people's ability to label emotions, and she says, "Over the course of 5 years, we collected these surveys from more than 7,000 people. The average number of emotions named across this survey were 3: happy, sad, and angry." And it makes sense to take the most understood emotions and write them into a story. But I think the problem I have is something that she would later bring up, when she quotes philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein: "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world," and then responds, "What does it mean if the vastness of human emotion and experience can only be expressed as mad, sad, and happy?" And this is the problem of these stories. How much do we limit both our tools for color expression and our emotional complexity when they're supposed to both just equate to one another? I think sadly more than I like. Let's start with Inside Out. The general premise of the story was marketed on this workplace-style drama that personifies the multitude of human emotions that guided each of their previous works. Thus, they got an NPC-sponsored cast to voice each of the previously mentioned emotions, and told a story about Riley, a young girl struggling with moving away from her hometown and going to San Francisco, where she struggles to adapt to a new environment, people, and living situation. It's definitely a cute story and one I still have affection for. In fact, it does a lot of things right. It shows that sadness slowly enveloping joyful memories is how grief specifically is a type of sadness from the loss of joy, or how the ability to understand sadness also teaches you compassion for others, or just simply how the overfixation of joy can feel self-destructive. Which, in a story geared towards children and aimed so that they could be understood, is interesting and worth praising. It's still a cohesive story. However, the thing I'm missing from this is the color. While the colors make sense at first in Riley's developing mind to be a stark contrast with one another, the hues and differences between them don't change in the separate minds that we also see. Yes, their appearance reflects the individual, but that's nothing more than a gag. And even when the memories do become sad, they don't specifically play with color, they just turn from one color into another. There's no blending, there's no shading, there's no in-between these colors, and thus feels like there's little in-between these emotions. As I said, Riley as a child makes it easy to swap her mood, but she's also the only perspective that we really get to see. Even if the notion of anger controlling her dad's mind and sadness controlling her mom's is present, that work isn't really done with this concept. Similar to how, in the end of the movie, we do see memories beginning to form with two separate colors, but Once again, these emotions don't blend. They don't mix. They just exist at the same time with one another, and not in a way that feels reflective of Riley's mixed emotions. Also, we don't see these mixed emotions inform Riley. Those tiny mixed colored memories at the end offer an interesting idea, but the movie isn't really about that. Thus, I don't think I can give it anything beyond the mere mention. Plus, the idea that Riley's mind itself doesn't interpret these emotions as mixed also feels failing.
Okay, what abstract concept are we trying to comprehend today?
Loneliness.
Complicated emotions exist in all minds, even developing ones. The problem there lies in the communication of those complicated feelings, but instead, the rigid beholding to one color is what makes the metaphor feel limiting and prescriptive, rather than engaging. Don't get me wrong, there's still good character emotional stuff here. My point is, the color isn't the thing doing it. The absent-minded performance of sadness mixed with joy's slowly overbearing and forceful tones, those are the things that communicate the emotions, not the color changing, which mostly just works on the base level. We don't even really see different hues of those colors. We don't get to see a shade of blue that represents Riley's deep loneliness or her grief, or even the compassionate side of her sadness, just like we don't get to see the difference in color of Joy's youthful bliss contrasted against the loud and steamrolling. The biggest differential we see fluctuating within emotions is the brightness or tint of the color. And for those that don't know, tint in color theory refers to any color with white added to it. Thus, in Inside Out, they use white to communicate intensity of emotion, just like they use shade or usage of dark tones to communicate the low intensity of emotions, which is why in the end of the movie, Riley is dressed in black and her forgotten memories fade to dark shades of gray. And that could be fine, theoretically, but that usage of tint and shade for intensity means that we're really only left with hues, or the dominant color family, to communicate different emotions, and the shade or tint just dictates how large that one emotion is. Or, in simple terms, it implies that we're limited to these 5 emotions and that everything else is just a calm or intense variation of them. Or, at very least, that's all this color metaphor through these parameters can communicate. Because yellow and blue are defined as happy and sad, they can't mix to make green because that would be disgust, which isn't the in-between of those emotions. Colors mixing here would actually destroy the metaphor. And yeah, I know this is a children's movie. Even though I think developing minds can still be shown in more dimensions than this, I'm willing to give it a pass. Although, this concept would continue to still be faulty in something where the target audience is young adults, who can, in marketing's eyes, feel the full dimensions of emotion. And yet, even in Life is Strange True Colors, I can't help but notice the same failings of this exact structure of colors and feelings. So, in Life is Strange True Colors, we now follow Alex Chen, a young woman whose empathic abilities to feel and visualize emotional auras around people. The game is about her trying to uncover the mystery of who murdered her brother, and so, her abilities are a compass to guide her to the truth and reason behind everyone's actions up to the final confrontation of the murderer. As I said before, this A-plot is less important than the emotional journey of the rest of the cast. Alex helps them all through their respective feelings and emotions, and that's really the meat of this story. This isn't a review of that game, so I won't get too deeper other than that, but the key thing to note here is the colors. The same colors that map onto Inside Out's colors, minus disgust. So, where Inside Out could get away with the lens of a developing mind, we find ourselves having to navigate the tricky atmosphere of adults' emotions and feelings, and they're no more complex than the emotions presented in Inside Out.
Whatever it is you're thinking about right now, don't stop, okay? Keep going. What emotion is this?
When someone glows blue, they're sad. When someone glows red, they're mad, and so on and so forth. And what ends up happening here is a lot of the emotional complexity of these characters feels presented in the most simple way possible. For example, the game deals with the aftermath of Alex's brother Gabe's death, right? We see all the ways people mourn his loss, therefore, you'd expect to see a lot of blue, the primary color for sadness. And we do, but there's no visual communication of the difference in that sadness.
I need to feel her sadness to figure out how to help her.
Let's take 2 moments from episode 2 where Gabe's friend Steph comes to talk to Alex and she's feeling the grief of missing Gabe. Loneliness. And in episode 3, Alex speaks to Diane, the woman in charge of legally covering up Gabe's death. She also has blue, but from listening to her monologue, she's feeling guilty. Both of these feelings are cast in the same hue of blue, and I don't think that's right. I understand how both of these derive from the same sadness, but would I really say the feeling of them is the same? No. Weirdly, in both of these cases, my superpower of getting to visualize emotions is less informative than their thoughts.
I
can't undo what Typhon did, or the role I played. But at least I have everything I need to protect myself from them.
You're the worst! Can't believe I have to stay in this stupid town.
I think we both know you could have beat me if you really wanted to. So you're welcome.
Bullshit.
I think I know enough to help her now.
Which feels kinda bad. Like, look at the key art of the game. A tie-dye wash of color flowing in between each other. Much like how emotions overlap and you're not quite sure where one ends and the other begins. But this doesn't feel like it tells me much, which would be fine if I was just a telepath and just reading minds, but that's not what Alex's ability is. She says that she can see auras around people, and in fiction that deals with superpowers, I think how that power is demonstrated is kind of important. I can guess why Life is Strange is set up like this. It is half a mystery story, thus people contribute to the problem for understandably flawed reasons. That's just a good mystery story, right? But what gets me is that the information isn't the collection of feelings associated with the color, but the small tidbits of information I glean from each one. There's not a variety of sad blues and fearful purples that build Diane's guilty consciousness. There's not even tiny inklings of yellow that reflect the nostalgic happy times with Gabe that slowly morph into deep sad blues for Steph. It's all just blue. There's no complexity to the visualization. And even worse, this power and visualization is meant to be the grand truth in this narrative. This is supposed to be the closest to truth that we can uncover in this mystery. But the communication that someone, these characters who just contributed to covering a murder up because they were just feeling angry, is really simple and kind of reductive of those emotions. True Colors' narrative is a meditation of people struggling to communicate difficult emotions for complicated reasons. However, there's very little complexity to the emotions they need to communicate because the power in gameplay itself reduces them to the simple color palette that anybody can recognize.
You can hate me if you want. Call me a coward. But I don't want to lose you like we lost Gabe.
There is one moment where the opposite happens, when you confront the final antagonist, leader of the town, Jed Lucan, where you must have him confront his sins and motivations, and guess what? Look at the color in this scene. It's blurred and mixed, because he did some things for selfish reasons, and he did some things for what he thought was the betterment of the town. This is what all the emotions should really be looking like, right? This moment is cool, and I really liked it, but it also only lasts for like 5 minutes in the last episode. It makes this complex emotion of Jed feel like the exception, and not the rule, which feels reductive of how all these characters have felt during this journey.
Every day you were brave enough to go underground and look death in the eye. But you couldn't muster the courage to admit a mistake. I can feel you trying to pull away. Don't.
Because like Inside Out, True Colors has complexity to it, it just generally communicates it in different ways. True Colors' primary way is having characters feel something that contradicts their outward appearance. Like Charlotte, the loving mother who's frustrated and mad at Gabe, Alex, and her own son while trying to keep it all together. Or Eleanor, the flower woman who's recently diagnosed with dementia and is trying to keep her business and friendships running while being really scared of everyone finding out about her condition. I enjoyed my time getting to know both these women and feeling for their problems. I think the frustration I feel is just how limited this presentation is. I want to see colors, I want to see the subtle touch of nuance in the colors themselves, I want to see the full spectrum of blues side by side with one another, I want to see what yellow looks like with a small tinge of red, or how purple can morph into blue without realizing it. Joy in Inside Out is interesting because she, in personality, encompasses all the emotions we associate with yellow. Happy, loud, energetic, obnoxious. These are varieties of yellows we could see, but when tint and shade are only used to communicate intensity, there's no ability to blend happiness with anything, then it presents something nuanced as something really simple. It weirdly makes the emotions inside Riley's mind have more dimensions than she as the individual feeling them does. And in Alex's case, her power ends up feeling like a power to read subtext. Oh, this person went into a corner and said they need a moment, I bet they're probably feeling a little down. But I suppose this isn't these stories' fault. This notion might just be difficult, because whether you're looking at pigment or light, the color spectrum stems from 3 primary colors that then make up the rest of the colors. They're the foundational thing that builds the rest, so naturally that could equate to the 3 most easily recognizable emotions. But that's just not how feelings work. The metaphor itself is limiting because the very nature of emotion is intangible. it almost denies being captured by the restrictions of how we visualize color. Least of which that color is mostly a visual experience. While emotions are kinetic and audible, there's something that flows between all the senses. So by limiting it to just a visual expression, we're losing the full breadth of what emotion can really capture. And there are moments when colors are redefined in movies and stories that I really like. Perhaps it's only when given this sheer amount of weight and narrative text of being the main language that the incompatibility of these two ideas really begins to show. In both the stories I listed, people feel things like disappointment or frustration. And I think about how many times in my life somebody has said, "I'm not mad, I'm just frustrated," or "I'm not really that sad, I'm just disappointed." There's a distinction there, and an acknowledgement of emotional complexity that can't just be summarized as feeling slightly less than sad or slightly more than anger. Both emotions can't be the same color, nor can one color clearly identify with one emotion.
Don't pretend. Just be yourself.
But what if I'm still, not having fun?
Then don't. That's fine too.
Which is where I still feel like this concept has some room to grow. Like one of the basic examples that comes to my mind is red. If I asked you to give me a color for anger, you'd probably say red. But if I asked you to give me the color for love, what would you say? Probably also red. Maybe pink? Now, of course, that's Valentine's marketing working on us, but I think in that, pink is a brighter tint of red, which seemingly dissuades Inside Out's approach to use brightness to signify intensity, as I guarantee that the wide variety of these colors bring up a wide variety of feelings for all of you. When I show you a darker shade of blue or a brighter tint of green, the hues can't be as concrete as a single emotion, and the fluidity of changing them just the slightest bit in some colors will change your perceptions, as I suggest would happen if one began to slowly morph into another. This is a visual language that does also exist. Any depth into color psychology will tell you that. But as it's used here as a narrative tool, I can't help but see the lack of full utilization. So at the end of this, I don't really know what the answer is. I don't think the answer is to abandon this whole equation, but instead to redefine the strict adherence of one definition. If the story is intended to be all-encompassing, then the color should be a loose framework of flexible notions, because how else do you get yellow and blue mixing together? Does happy and sad make disgust? No. But the combinations of those two ideas are interesting, right? If the colors are allowed to mix and blend together, then we get fluidity between all of them. Hell, we can get the frustration of mixing two complementaries together and getting an ugly mesh of them both, or the perfect synthesis of two tertiary colors flowing together to make an entirely new color. Because that's just how that feels, right?
Are you okay?
For now. We'll see how long that lasts.
But for now, that's all I got. Thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you next time.